this particular schema kind of falls in the domain of autonomy, and usually people that have this schema kind of came from families where identity formation wasn't encouraged. It wasn't about what I want, it was what we want, what's good for us as a family or as a parent, etc. So they weren't encouraged to try and work out what they like and what they don't like. So what we're talking about here is enmeshment and the undeveloped self schema. I'm Rita Younan, clinical psychologist, advanced schema therapist, supervisor trainer. Welcome to 7 Minute Schemas.
And I'm Ruth Holt. We're taking a series approach to looking at each of the individual schemas in Jeff Young's early maladaptive schemas that he identified as part of schema therapy. And today we are talking about the enmeshment schema, which you can see in maybe a few different ways that they might present in therapy, but it's really about having an excessive emotional involvement and closeness with one or more other people. So it's often a parent or parents, at the expense of full individuation. So there's a kind of a developmental full stop that's happened because the needs of the parent or the family unit have overridden the needs of the child. And often what we find is it'll present in maybe more subtle ways. Typically clients won't identify this as a problem. They may actually feel like this is a really lovely part of their family, that we're very close and we all agree on everything, and we just meet each other's needs. We know what each other thinks. And so you've got to tread a little bit carefully when you're working with and identifying this schema with a client, because when you say, you know what, I'm thinking this might be an enmeshment schema, they actually will get very triggered at that point, feel very disloyal. They feel like they might be betraying their parents, and they'll then start to defend the system. So we have to be careful, I think, in raising this topic and starting to kind of understand, you know, maybe calling it a different name if that's more palatable, to talk about the closeness that you feel with your family. Tell me about this closeness. What does it mean? What does it look like? What are the rules about your closeness? I think that's a really helpful way to start understanding the enmeshment schema, because typically in enmeshment, there'll be a lot of rules. You know, love means you always agree with me. Love means you don't upset dad. Love means you don't ever leave this town where we all live. You know, love has a lot of requirements in enmeshment. And so getting clients to start to understand the rules they learned growing up helps them to start to understand that maybe this is not so helpful.
Yeah, and I guess the breaking of the rules results in excessive guilt. So there's kind of guilt-inducing part of them as a result of wanting to individuate. And, you know, sometimes you might actually find this particular schema in adolescent patients as you're working with families. And, you know, again, you're talking about treading carefully in terms of how you kind of talk about this idea of closeness. So whether it's an adolescent patient or whether it's an adult patient down the track, one of the things that you want to perhaps provide in treatment is psychoeducation on boundaries. What do healthy relationships actually look like?
That's right. And I think there's, you know, you need to understand a fair bit about how a family operates to be able to sense where those boundaries are typically being crossed. So I remember working with one adult client who was having a lot of difficulty. They couldn't form a long-term partnership. They felt depressed. I thought it might have been maybe defectiveness schema in there. But actually, as we talked and he started to outline his daily routine, what I discovered was he was expected to have a 45-minute phone call with both parents every day at a certain time. And if he got held up at work or was too busy, they would pester him about what was wrong, what you know, was he upset with them, until he did have that 45-minute conversation. And so you've kind of got to be aware that, I think, if you're thinking about defectiveness, there's going to be a sort of underlining tone of sadness or shame. Whereas with enmeshment, it may feel more anxious, and empty is another feeling that can come along. And I think Jeff Conway's done some beautiful work in this area. Jeff, when you're writing a book, I think we've got a lot to learn in helping people to meet those needs for both autonomy and attunement.
And I think it's probably worth just kind of thinking about the tone of the environment too. So with defectiveness, shame, the tone of the environment might have been quite critical, whereas with enmeshment and undeveloped self, the tone of the environment could have been quite anxious. So kind of anxious parents kind of wanting to make sure that the child's okay, that they're in close proximity, et cetera, and not allowing that development of the self.
It can also happen too, I think, when there's been abuse in the relationship and perhaps or an absent parent, and the other parent then overly relies on the child to meet those emotional needs. So it's like a parentification, or it could be also a kind of almost a fusing of emotional needs, which can feel really good for a child. They can feel like, well, dad's not around, but I'm helping mum and I'm her special person. One of the books on this is called Emotional Incest, and I think that's a confronting title, but it kind of shows that there's this substitute partner element that's going on often in enmeshment. I guess another thing that I'm trying to do when I'm working with clients is help them to work on the undeveloped self component of this schema. So it's the enmeshment with others, but it's also, I don't know who I am. So really kind of going back and getting some of those developed milestones happening, getting them to understand what I'm interested in, what I like, what I don't like, how I express that. And even in the therapy relationship, it's really good for them to learn that they have some power in this relationship, so that we don't then become another relationship where we're the dominant one and they subjugate themselves to us.
And sometimes when you do that work, you might find resistance in terms of, I don't know, I don't know. So one of the things that you might want to start doing is just kind of keeping an ear out. Like, I remember a particular patient, exactly that. I don't know what car I like or what color I like, etc. And one time he made a comment about something that he liked, and I went, oh, so what you know about yourself is that you like X. And so really kind of starting to track all of the things that they actually do know about themselves in order to highlight that that schema isn't accurate all of the time.
Yeah, and I think in imagery, you can also go back to times where that autonomy was squashed. So that can be really important targets to do some imagery work to challenge that behavior, challenge that way of thinking about love and family, and saying, actually, you've got a beautiful little boy or girl here who has great ideas. You need to stop dominating. You need to stop controlling. And that can be, I think, quite powerful when a client's at the stage where they're ready for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's our 7 minutes up, Rita. There's more information about training and online and face-to-face training at the websites listed at the end of this video.